welcome back to Fresh Faces New Ideas. My name's David. If you like the channel and you want to get updated to when I do a new video, please like and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter at Faces Ideas, and that'll keep you notified when I do more stuff. The more people are notified, the farther I can reach out to. So, this video we're going to talk about the National Review article, talking about, maybe it's better that we don't have good voters or as many voters as long as we have better voters. Now, I'm going to be honest, prior to doing this video, I'd only seen the headline of this article. I hadn't read it, but I don't go into it just based on the headline because I've read it. And I had a thought process going into it after I read it, or before I read it. The thought process was one thing. I'm still going over some of those points, but this article is way worse than I thought it was. It is written by a conservative, and the general argument is, more people voting doesn't necessarily mean we're doing better. We need to have the right people who are voting. That's what matters. So let's take a look at the article, and then there's some other points that I want to point to a reason why the argument of, we need to have better voters doesn't make sense when you look at what's happening to the education system. Okay, so this was written by Kevin D. Williamson, and the headline is, the fact that voters got us in the mess, maybe the answer isn't more voters. Much of the discussion about proposed changes to law is backed by many Republicans and generally opposed by Democrats begs the question and simply asserts that having more people vote is, this is Latin for a good thing. And then he asks, why should we believe that? Why shouldn't we believe the opposite? That the Republic is better served by having fewer but better voters. Now, let's just talk about the overall disconnect between the Republican Party and its voters. Not just the voters in the country, their voters. I'm going to do another video about the Marsha Blackburn post about how she doesn't want to help old people. But let's just take a look at the most recent piece of legislation that passed, the American Rescue Plan. That had a 70% approval rating, including a higher approval rating, a positive approval rating from Republicans. Yet not a single Republican lawmaker voted for that bill. They're taking credit for it, but they didn't vote for it. Now, tell me, how is it possible that having educated voters, having less people vote, but be more educated, would have stopped the Republican Party from voting for a piece of legislation that was overwhelmingly popular among their own constituents? The answer is it's not. Because the problem is not the voters. The problem is the people they vote for. So let's continue what else this article says. He talks about disenfranchising felons being on a case-by-case basis, and he wants to raise the voting age to 30, which is absurd. I don't believe that at all. And then he goes, photo ID is not that bad. Why isn't this treated more like a, if you have an ID, how do you exist otherwise? And then, so here's his argument. He goes, the trade-offs in voting, as they're all in all things. Democrats prefer to minimize attention paid to voting fraud and eligibility enforcement, but even a little bit of fraud or impromptu voting is something that should be discouraged and, if possible, prevented. It is, spare me your sob story, something that's been prosecuted in many cases. Is the fact that there are many of the things that would be useful in discouraging preventing voter fraud will also tend to make voting somewhat more difficult for at least some part of the population. Now, this is not... hold on. It says the Republicans generally think this trade-off is worth it, and Democrats generally don't. Let's be clear. This is a reoccurring theme from Republicans now. They have said, this is now counting the third time that they have said, we're more worried about voter fraud than we are about having everybody eligible to vote. Which, would be an interesting argument if voter fraud was significant in any portion. You say, okay, well, if there's, for example, there was 2 cases of voter fraud in the 2020 election that was found. Both of them were by Republicans. In Texas, they did a massive audit and found 16 people had the wrong address written down on their mail-in ballots. 16 people. There's 17 million people in Texas. That's not even to argue that they voted illegally. They just had the wrong address. They had the wrong information down. That's literally less than 1 in a million. So this man's argument is, because there are these tiny fractions, we're talking minuscule percentages, and I've covered this time and time again. of people, voter fraud cases, we should stop more and more people from voting. This argument they only make this argument for voting. They don't make this argument for gun violence, which is what I'm going to go over tomorrow in my live stream. Gun violence, today is April 8th. There's been 128 mass shootings in America this year. 128. We're 4 months into the year. Keep in mind, part of the country is locked down during that time. But you know what? We can't do anything about any guns. But there's one voter fraud, not even real voter fraud that we're going to find, and we have to change how voting works. Now, the argument I was going to make is still consistent. The reason we have low information voters is twofold. One, politics is hard. It is very difficult to understand the ins and outs of some things. That's part of what the point of this channel is. I want to make it easier to understand. That's why when I go over individual bills, I discuss them from both what's in the bill, what's the argument against the bill, what's the argument against the argument. So that people who don't have time to follow the news for 18 hours a day can just watch my, 20-minute video, and they can be informed about what's actually happening. Furthermore, the spread of disinformation is a massive, massive issue. And the argument of, both sides do it. When Donald Trump was removed from Twitter, voter fraud or false voting claims about the election dropped 73%. This is not a both sides argument, not in any fair way. Now let's go to the other reason. The other reason that there is so little, that there's a voter turnout issue or a better voter issue, is because of education. So, as it stands, this is what our education statistics are. This is how much we spend. However, according to this, the United States education spending falls short of benchmarks set by international organizations such as UNESCO, of which the U.S. is a member. The nation puts 11% of its public funding toward education, well below the national standard of 15%. In terms of percentage of gross domestic product, the United States ranks 12th among OECD members in spending on elementary education. Does not meet the benchmark of 15%. As one of 6, we don't even report what we spend on early childhood education. And then, obviously everyone knows how expensive colleges are. So this is the top spending per education. We're not on this list. But here's the real one. The Department of Education's annual education budget. This is how much money it spends on first education, post secondary, and other educational programs. We've dropped precipitously from other educational programs, adult education, vocational trainers, student loans, etc. This is during the Trump administration, it dropped from $97 billion to $7 billion. Loans are how people get educations. There was a drop again. This is the high of Obama for elementary education, and it is dropped. Part of this is education spending by state, and this is the other one. So here's the top 10 spending by whether you're a Republican or whether you're a Democrat. Now, the Republican argument is always, the liberals have control over the secondary education. They have control over colleges, and they're indoctrinating our children. This is not for just liberals. This is for general education. So, generally speaking, the bottom part of the country in terms of education are red states, with the exception of, California. They argue California is super liberal, but their education is not good either. I didn't realize it was that bad. So, according to this, and this is backed up by almost every study, the states that spend the least are Republican states. That's why they have lower education. Now, this is why there is the stereotype that Republican voters are uneducated. And it's not directly their fault. It is a two-pronged problem. And it is not solved by what this author is trying to say. The answer is not less voting. The answer is more money in education, stricter rules on misinformation, like Facebook saying you can just lie in your political ads, and a media, both mainstream and media like me, calling out the lies. I'm going to tell you what the facts are. I'm going to tell you whether it's one side is wrong or the other side is wrong. And when both sides are wrong, I will tell it. I go after Democrats. I go after Republicans. People are going to say, oh, you're going after Republicans more. Yes, because this current iteration of the party is so objectively horrible, it is not a comparison. I'm definitely going after Democrats. I'll do that in the live stream, and I do it on the podcast I go on. I almost exclusively go after Democrats on that podcast. Neither party is perfect. The country is not perfect. The answer is, oh, we should have less people voting. The answer is, we should educate the voting population more, and then the people in charge, the people who are sent to Congress to do the will of the voters, do the will of the voters. Even if you have the most educated, highly understanding group of people, and they all want something, if your legislator votes against it, how is that your fault? Well, it's your fault for sending them there. That's how it's your fault. And if you keep sending them there when they vote against your interest over and over again, well, then you're a sucker. It's as simple as that. So, this article is bad. Voting is good, but you have to be educated. How do you get educated? Well, you like and subscribe on my channel. I'm going to tell you how it is. All right? So, if you like this video, like and subscribe. Please follow me on Twitter @FacesIdeas, and I will see you in the next one.